Hello, welcome to our channel Word of God Today. Today we will reflect on why Lucifer, Satan, was expelled from heaven and banished to hell. Let's begin with the citation of the passage from Ezekiel, chapter 28, verses 15 to 18, which is referred to in ancient tradition as a poem about Lucifer. It goes as follows. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. Through your widespread trade you were filled with violence, and you sinned. So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God, and I expelled you, guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to the earth. I made a spectacle of you before kings. By your many sins and dishonest trade you have desecrated your sanctuaries. So I made a fire come out from you, and it consumed you, and I reduced you to ashes on the ground in the sight of all who were watching. Can we affirm that the devil, in person and literally, is the personification of evil and has many names? Satan, the prince of demons, the father of lies, the ruler of this world, the tempter, the dragon, the serpent. He has been part of folklore and horror stories for so long that many people think he is a fictional character created to scare audiences in movies worldwide. In reality, the devil has a history that predates the creation of humanity, and many may be surprised to learn that before his banishment from heaven, his story had an angelic beginning. First point to consider: Lucifer served God as a guardian cherub. The Bible does not provide an exact timeline for the origin of Satan. Instead, what we know about the beginning of Satan comes from passages written by the prophets Ezekiel and Isaiah. Passages that Bible scholars believe detail the devil's fall from heaven. Ezekiel chapter 28, Isaiah chapter 14. The prophets tell us that Satan was an angel known as the morning star, translated as Lucifer. Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 14, Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12. As an angel, Lucifer walked on God's holy mountain and was anointed to serve God as a member of the guardian cherubs, among the highest ranks of angels in God's sacred army, second only to the seraphim. Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 14. The fact that Lucifer was ordained as a cherub was no small honor. In heaven, cherubim hold such a position of celestial prominence that God himself is seated enthroned between the cherubim. Isaiah chapter 37 verse 16. Second point, Lucifer's pride led God to expel him from heaven. As a creation of God, we know that Lucifer was created good. Genesis chapter 1 verse 31. In fact, the scriptures state that Lucifer began as blameless in all his ways and as the epitome of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Ezekiel 28 verses 12, 15. Furthermore, God's ordination of Lucifer as a cherub demonstrates that God entrusted Lucifer enough to give him a position of power among the heavenly angels. Ezekiel 28 verse 14. However, Lucifer was not content with the power and gifts God had given him. Instead, Lucifer wanted more. Lucifer became so consumed by pride in his God-given splendor that he became corrupt and violent, no longer willing to serve God. Ezekiel 28 verses 15, 17, Isaiah 14 verses 13, 14. This sense of superiority led Lucifer to use his free will to plot to be greater than God and gather an army of angels to help him carry out this scheme. Ezekiel 28 verse 17, Isaiah 14 verses 13, 14, Revelation 12 verses 3, 4, Revelation 12 verse 9. Thus, Satan's sin was the pride of rebelling against God and attempting to take from God the praise and glory reserved only for the Almighty Lord. Pride is at the top of the list of sins that God hates. Proverbs 6 verses 16, 17. The pride that the Bible condemns does not refer to feelings of accomplishment for a job well done. The sense of accomplishment is good. Instead, biblical pride refers to being so self-obsessed that one's mind never turns to God and their heart never seeks Him. Fortunately for us, Satan's proud scheme to usurp God's throne failed. As punishment for his disobedience and the grave dishonor of his angelic position, God cast Lucifer out of heaven, hurling him with his army of fallen angels to the earth, as stated in Revelation 12 verse 9. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him, and ultimately condemning them to hell. Matthew 25 verse 41. Jesus confirms the devil's fall from grace and likened it to a lightning bolt from the sky. Luke 10 verse 18. And the Apostle Peter alluded to the devil's fall when he warned that God did not spare even the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. Once Lucifer was expelled from heaven, he realized he did not have the power to directly take God's throne. Instead, Lucifer focused on trying to overpower God in another way, by tempting God's children to abandon him. At this point, the morning star, known as Lucifer, became the adversary and accuser of humanity, known as Satan. Third point, Lucifer became Satan, the accuser, who tempts humanity to sin. Satan has used his wisdom and cunning to steal humanity's eternal salvation, ever since his own fall from grace. In fact, Satan initiated humanity's first sin by tempting Adam and Eve with the same desire that caused his own downfall. The sinful desire to be like God. Isaiah 14 verses 13, 14, Genesis 3 verses 1, 5. It is important to note that Satan's first temptation of humanity was successful, not only in damaging humanity's relationship with God, but also in causing our first parents to turn against each other when Adam blamed Eve for giving him the forbidden fruit to eat. Genesis 3 verse 12. This shows how easily temptation and sin can lead to conflicts and divisions, promoting Satan's goal of creating chaos among the children of God. Now that we understand Satan's origin, the question arises, what can we learn from Satan's fall? As Christians, we know that Satan and his demons will ultimately be defeated and thrown into the lake of fire for eternity. Matthew 25 verse 41. However, until the end of times, Satan remains a powerful spiritual being whose sole purpose is to deceive us into severing our relationship with God and with one another. John 8 verse 44, Revelation 12 verse 10. It is by severing our relationship with God and with our brothers and sisters that Satan seeks to rob us of our peace and ultimately destroy our lives. John 10 verse 10. It is no wonder that when describing the devil's attempts to ruin us, the Apostle Peter describes Satan as a roaring lion who prowls around, looking for someone to devour. 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 8. One way in which the devil devours our relationship with God and with one another is by deceiving us into believing that right and wrong are relative. Satan wants nothing more than for each of us to act as our own individual gods, throwing stones at each other based on our own moral code and denying the authority and commandments of the one God of the universe. To avoid falling into Satan's traps, we need not look further than the cause of Satan's expulsion from paradise: pride. Satan's pride was the first sin committed in the universe, and humanity has been warned ever since that pride precedes a fall. Proverbs 16 verse 18, 1 Timothy chapter 3 verse 6. Arguably, all sins are rooted in pride when we consider that sin is placing our own desires above the will of God. Therefore, the faithful can avoid falling into the trap of pride and all other sins derived from pride by living according to the Word of God. The Word instructs us to love God and one another, to make every effort to live in peace with everyone, and to pray for our enemies. If we do everything in our power to reflect love, peace, and humility in our actions, we can resist Satan by keeping pride in check and submitting to the will of God, who promises to oppose the proud and exalt the humble. James chapter 4 verses 6, 10. We have reached the end of this story. Let us stay in the peace of God and pray not to fall into Satan's traps.